piano and did as she was bid. "That's the sort of music it's a pleasure to hear. Sing some more, dear," said Madame in her gentle way when she had done. Pleased with this praise, Polly sang away in a fresh little voice that went straight to the listener's heart and nestled there. The sweet old tunes that one is never tired of were all Polly's store, and her favorites were Scotch airs, such as "Yellow-haired Laddie," "Jack o' Hazeldean," "Down among the Heather," and "Berks of Aberfeldy." The more she sung, the better she did it, and when she wound up with "A health to King Charlie," the room quite rung with the stirring music made by the big piano and the little maid. "By George, that's a jolly tune! Sing it again, please," cried Tom's voice. And there was Tom's red head bobbing up over the high back of the chair where he had hidden himself. It gave Polly quite a turn, for she thought no one was hearing her but the old lady dozing by the fire. "I can't sing any more. I'm tired," she said, and walked away to Madame in the other room. The red head vanished like a meteor, for Polly's tone had been decidedly cool. The old lady put out her hand, and drawing Polly to her knee, looked into her face with such kind eyes that Polly forgot the impressive cap, and smiled at her confidingly, for she saw that her simple music had pleased her listener, and she felt glad to know it. "You mustn't mind my staring, dear," said Madame, softly pinching her rosy cheek. "I haven't seen a little girl for so long. It does my old eyes good to look at you." Polly thought that a very odd speech, and couldn't help saying, "Aren't Fan and Maud little girls too?" "Oh, dear, no, not what I call little girls. Fan has been a young lady this 2 years, and Maud is a spoiled baby. Your mother's a very sensible woman, my child." "What a very queer old lady," thought Polly, but she said "Yes'm" respectfully, and looked at the fire. "You don't understand what I mean, do you?" asked Madame, still holding her by the chin. "No'm, not quite." "Well, dear, I'll tell you. In my day, children of 14 and 15 didn't dress in the height of fashion, go to parties as nearly like those of grown people as it's possible to make them, lead idle, giddy, unhealthy lives, and get blasé at 20. We were little folks till 18 or so, worked and studied, dressed and played like children, honored our parents, and our days were much longer in the land than now, it seems to me." The old lady appeared to forget Polly at the end of her speech, for she sat patting the plump little hand that lay in her own, and looked up at a faded picture of an old gentleman with a ruffled shirt and a queue. "Was he your father, Madame?" "Yes, dear, my honored father. I did up his frills to the day of his death, and the first money I ever earned was $5, which he offered as a prize to whichever of his 6 girls would lay the handsomest darn in his silk stockings." "How proud you must have been!" cried Polly, leaning on the old lady's knee with an interested face. "Yes, and we all learned to make bread, and cook, and wore little chintz gowns, and were as gay and hearty as kittens. All lived to be grandmothers and fathers, and I'm the last. 70 next birthday, my dear, and not worn out yet, though daughter Shaw is an invalid at 40. "That's the way I was brought up, and that's why Fan calls me old-fashioned, I suppose. Tell more about your papa, please. I like it," said Polly. "Say father. We never called him papa, and if one of my brothers had addressed him as governor, as boys do now, I really think he'd have him cut off with a shilling." Madame raised her voice in saying this, and nodded significantly, but a mild snore from the other room seemed to assure her that it was a waste of shot to fire in that direction. Before she could continue, in came Fanny with the joyful news that Clara Bird had invited them both to go to the theatre with her that very evening, and would call for them at 7 o'clock. Polly was so excited by this sudden plunge into the dissipations of city life that she flew about like a distracted butterfly, and hardly knew what happened, till she found herself seated before the great green curtain in the brilliant theatre. Old Mr. Bird sat on one side, Fanny on the other, and both let her alone, for which she was very grateful, as her whole attention was so absorbed in the scene around her that she couldn't talk. Polly had never been much to the theatre, and the few plays she had seen were the good old fairy tales, dramatized to suit young beholders, lively, bright, and full of the harmless nonsense which brings the laugh without the blush. That night she saw one of the new spectacles which have lately become the rage, and run for hundreds of nights, dazzling, exciting, and demoralizing the spectator by every allurement French ingenuity can invent, and American prodigality execute. Never mind what its name was, it was very gorgeous, very vulgar, and very fashionable, so of course it was much admired, and everyone went to see it. At first Polly thought she had got into fairyland, and saw only the sparkling creatures who danced and sung in a world of light and beauty. But presently she began to listen to the songs and conversation, and then the illusion vanished, for the lovely phantoms sang negro melodies, talked slang, and were a disgrace to the good old-fashioned elves whom she knew and loved so well. Our little girl was too innocent to understand half the jokes, and often wondered what people were laughing at, but as the first enchantment subsided Polly began to feel uncomfortable, to be sure her mother wouldn't like to have her there, and to wish she hadn't come. Somehow things seemed to get worse and worse as the play went on, for our small spectator was being rapidly enlightened by the gossip going on all about her, as well as by her own quick eyes and girlish instincts. When 24 girls dressed as jockeys came prancing onto the stage, cracking their whips, stamping the heels of their tap boots, and winking at the audience, Polly did not think it at all funny, but looked disgusted, and was glad when they were gone. But when another set appeared in a costume consisting of gauze wings and a bit of gold fringe round the waist, poor unfashionable Polly didn't know what to do, for she felt both frightened and indignant, and sat with her eyes on her playbill and her cheeks getting hotter and hotter every minute. "What are you blushing so for?" asked Fanny, as the painted sylphs vanished. "I'm so ashamed of those girls," whispered Polly, taking a long breath of relief. "You little goose! It's just the way it was done in Paris, and the dancing is splendid. It seems queer at first, but you'll get used to it as I did." "I'll never come again," said Polly decidedly, for her innocent nature rebelled against the spectacle, which as yet gave her more pain than pleasure. She did not know how easy it was to get used to it, as Fanny did, and it was well for her that the temptation was not often offered. She could not explain the feeling, but she was glad when the play was done, and they were safe at home, where kind grandma was waiting to see them comfortably into bed. "Did you have a good time, dear?" she asked, looking at Polly's feverish cheeks and excited eyes. "I don't wish to be rude, but I didn't," answered Polly. "Some of it was splendid, but a good deal of it made me want to go under the seat. People seemed to like it, but I didn't think it was proper." As Polly freed her mind, and emphasized her opinion with a decided rap of the boot she had just taken off, Fanny laughed, and said, while she pirouetted around the room like Mademoiselle Therese, "Polly was shocked, Grandma. Her eyes were as big as saucers, her face as red as my sash, and once I thought she was going to cry. Some of it was rather queer, but of course it was proper, or all our set wouldn't go. I heard Mrs. Smythe Perkins say it was charming, so like dear Paris, and she has lived abroad, so of course she knows what is what." "I don't care if she has. I know it wasn't proper for little girls to see, or I shouldn't have been so ashamed," cried sturdy Polly, perplexed but not convinced, even by Mrs. Smythe Perkins. "I think you are right, my dear, but you have lived in the country, and haven't yet learned that modesty has gone out of fashion." And with a good-night kiss, Grandma left Polly to dream dreadfully of dancing in a jockey costume on a great stage, while Tom played a big drum in the orchestra, and the audience all wore the faces of her father and mother, looking sorrowfully at her, with eyes like saucers, and faces as red as Fanny's sash.